welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 14 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, there was a bit of a kerfuffle with greed, but it seems like that's not immediately pertinent. You know, this here is an interesting scene in that everybody is sort of like talking amongst themselves about Colonel Mustang, and they seem to be sort of, well, for want of a better term, envious of his status. So on the one hand, Mustang is being transferred, but on the other hand, he seems to have picked a poor time now that the Führer is off out in the field. And given how we immediately cut to Greed's minions, it seems to me that's in all likelihood where he is. So, he claims it to be a routine inspection, but I don't know, man. Coincidences don't really happen. So, it's very interesting that as soon as fighting is no longer expedient, Greed decides he doesn't want to. So, I don't think he was necessarily running out of cowardice, but I think it's more fighting's just not in his interest. At least that's how it seems to me. I mean, it's also pretty clear that he was about to get it handed to him pretty handily. Meanwhile, Alphonse is almost starting to make good on an escape here. Or rather, he would had he not sort of bumped into Greed. Greed makes a pretty significant understatement about how things aren't really going to plan. So Bradley just sort of confronts Greed to the confusion of really everyone. So, it's interesting that Bradley admits to being 60 years old. You know, considering what we've seen of him, I would have guessed maybe like mid-40s at most. You know, like fairly early middle age. And I guess that, that expectation of mine is sort of reinforced by the fact that he was able to cut off one of Greed's limbs before he was able to protect it. Now that really is impressive considering how much Ed was struggling. Bradley seems to have no troubles in basically just slicing off little bits of him here and there. Of course, Bradley isn't alone. He brought a whole retinue of state alchemists and other military personnel with him. And, they all seem to be a relatively good match for Greed's minions. Armstrong's taking the big guy. Presumably the others are distracting the other ones. It is kind of interesting that this guy can sort of, harness his altered physiology by transforming. He also doesn't seem to be unique in that aspect. Now, I do find it notable that this is, what seems to be a bit of a search and destroy mission, in that the Fuhrer said, eliminate all those freaks. I mean, it's kind of understandable to a degree, given how they are essentially, man-made monstrosities. But, I don't know, maybe it's just the way the military does things. Shoot first, ask questions later. So I do find it interesting that Major Armstrong is sort of unwilling to kill these people, even though they are ostensibly, the bad guys, and they show little compunction about killing others. I guess it speaks to his honor. So unfortunately for Greed, he's really not doing too well. He's had limbs hacked off, he's taken a couple sabers to the throat. Ooh, that's an interesting little reveal there. Bradley is not entirely what he seems to be. This sort of, lends a new little bit of information to what Greed said about how he wasn't really getting along with those guys before. Turns out he's really not getting along with them if Bradley's willing to cut him down. So this raises a couple questions here. Did Greed just sort of go rogue, or was there a wider schism going on? Considering how self-interested he seems to be, I'm willing to bet it's the former. It is unfortunate that despite all his bluster, Greed really isn't doing too well. Bradley even sort of alludes to it, how many lives do you have left? It makes it sound like there's a set limit to how much Greed can rejuvenate and regenerate himself from his wounds. Considering how slowly that arm was growing back, it seems like there definitely is a hard limit, and he's pushing right up against it. So, if nothing else, this scene is kind of interesting in that Greed's minions seem to have a code of honor of their own, in that they are fiercely loyal to their boss. To the point where even that girl is willing to go out and effectively get killed. Alphonse is kind of unwilling to let that happen because he doesn't want to watch any more people die than need be. Whether that's misplaced or not is kind of up to interpretation. There's a little twist of irony in that her whole job was to sort of immobilize Alphonse, but now he's acting as a cage for her. So, as much as Greed is sort of like the lesser of two evils here, it's pretty clear he's not a good dude either, considering that he considers the death of his minions to essentially be theft against him. And I mean, I don't know, that's definitely not how any rational person would react to it. Speaking of rational, I'm wondering why he's only sort of carbonizing his arms and not his entire body. I feel like that would be a slightly better solution to this problem, in that he could probably fend off his attacks a little bit better. Man, Bradley really is cold as ice. He just sort of slides the sword and then kills her. That's gotta be a rather rough experience for Alphonse, considering, well, it's essentially inside his body. Even more than that, I'm wondering if it was all the blood splashing on the seal, if that's sort of what triggered this little sequence here of him essentially remembering the truth. I always thought these segments were very interesting in that there's sort of like a DNA motif where it's like reels of film that twist together like a double helix. And at the same time, the way bodies are deconstructed and reconstructed is also very unsettling. So this is a very interesting twist in that Alphonse was sort of seeing things from the perspective of their mother's new, malformed body. Oh dear. Seems like Alphonse's secret is out. At least to a select group of people. Oh dear. So yeah, things are truly not good, in that Bradley now wants to debrief them. So it seems like he's sort of treating them as potentially treasonous here for associating with Greed. Yeah, Bradley makes it pretty clear he's not playing here. I think Ed's playing this a little too cool than I think anyone has any reason to. And he's also sort of asking some pertinent questions about the state of their bodies. You know, it's really unsettling how Bradley can sort of transition between being very grim and serious and being sort of jovial. And especially considering what we've seen, it really seems like him being jovial is more of an act, rather than how he truly is. So Izumi makes an interesting point here in that, you know, is the country really so down in the hole that, you know, a bedridden housewife is needed to be a state alchemist? And, you know, the answer to that might be yes, but at the same time, she is highly skilled. of course, she seems to think that Bradley might have an ulterior motive for all of this. Alright, so it seems like Armstrong here is speaking from a bit of experience in that he might know a bit more about all the horrible goings-on. You know, he's sort of beseeching Edward not to do anything reckless. So once again, it's sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you know. Alphonse does in fact regain his memories, but none of them are really of any consequence. But at the same time, it's another little piece of the puzzle here, between then what they learned about greed and the military and all that. You know, they're starting to draw little connections here and there, but they don't quite grasp the full significance of everything. You know, Ed finds it weird that he just sort of killed Greed rather than kept him around to have him talk. You know, why would you do that unless you had something to hide? Of course, that's a dangerous sentiment to say out loud. So the plot continues to thicken a bit further. Bradley seems to be reporting to someone, and he's sort of earmarked the Elric brothers and Izumi as a candidate for human sacrifice, and he's also brought back Greed, who is indeed familiar with all the other homunculi. So it's very clear that Greed isn't on good terms with anyone here. In fact, he's rather, sardonic, you know, he just sort of ribs everyone a little bit. Of course, that being said, there are 3 of the 7, you know, if my math is right, that are not currently present. I'll take that back. You know, this confirms that King Bradley is Wrath. Sloth is off doing stuff, so the only one we don't know about currently is Pride. And, you know, given what little I know about theology, Pride is sort of the deadly sin that supersedes all of the others. You know, it's the worst. So the plot's getting a little bit thicker in that there's this guy who refers to the homunculi as his sons, or his children rather. And based on what little we're seeing of him, he shares a pretty big resemblance with Edward and Alphonse's father. Very interesting indeed. You know, surely their father couldn't be essentially the big villain behind all this, could he? Now, this is sort of interesting in that now that Greed is making it pretty clear he's not going to play ball with them, they essentially have to destroy him permanently. And I guess to do so, they sort of like dip him in a forge. You know, Greed makes a pretty apt comparison in that this furnace is a lot like hell. And that's where deadly sins tend to land you, so it's pretty apt. But I think it's pretty notable that even as he's dying, Greed is still defiant to the very end. So, whatever reason he had for rebelling, you know, it must have been pretty strong considering even as he's being, well, melted down, you know, he's still defiant. So interestingly, unlike Greed, the others are all seemingly absolutely loyal. One has to wonder why exactly Greed is so different. You know, it's not obvious that he would be the one that would rebel. If anything, one would think that pride, you know, being so full of itself as it surely must be, would be the one to sort of have its own plans. So there's a bit of a, maybe not a plot hole, but like a bit of an interesting observation. You know, Bradley has said he's 60, and his wife, I guess, is probably comparable in age to him. How exactly do they have so young a child? You know, that doesn't quite seem to add up to me. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.